When I was a couple weeks short of my 70th birthday, I started thinking about my mother's mother, who lived to be 100, and her mother, who lived to be 102, and my father, who lived to be 90, longer than anyone we had ever heard of in his family. I began to think that maybe our generation could be the first to routinely live to be 100. When I talked about this at family dinner one night, my granddaughter, who was 5, said,
"What are you going to do for the next 30 years, Grandpa?"
Hello, I'm Dr. Janet Price.
And I'm Gregg Kaloust. And we are Oldish. And this is our podcast, Oldish.
If you're oldish or know someone who is, please join us every week for conversations amongst ourselves
And our special guests
about what it means to be oldish in the 21st century.
If you ever wonder whether you're getting old, you're oldish. What are you going to do for the next 30 minutes?
Hi, I'm Janet, and I'm oldish.
Hi, I'm Greg, and I'm Oldish. Welcome to this episode of our podcast, Oldish Conversations on Aging in the 21st Century. We have two very special guests with us today to have a conversation. It's a daughter-father team that we had on specifically now because right around the time I get this edited and published, it'll be Father's Day. And what better way to celebrate your father than to go on a podcast with him and say nothing but nice things? So we have Zanny Steffgen and Roland Merullo. They're both writers. Zanny is a freelance writer who lives in Colorado, and Roland is an author of many novels, one of which our podcast episode on the Oldish Book Club a few weeks ago. We talked about one of Roland's books, The Delight of Being Ordinary. It's a story of an imagined road trip between the Dalai Lama and the Pope, and two interesting Italian-American folks who drove them around in Italy for a few days. We loved it. So we sent Roland along a link to the podcast to let him know that we had talked about it, and Roland listened to it, and we decided that we would all get together and have a conversation about various things. So, Zanny and Roland, you are engaged in a new enterprise, which I think, because of Roland's oldishness, is an oldish kind of a thing to do. You've started a substack called Hi Zanny, Hi Pa. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that. You can choose who goes first.
So I think it was last summer, my dad approached me and asked if I wanted to take on a writing project with him. And that's so fun because we're both writers professionally, full time, and yet we don't get to work together very often. So, of course, I said yes. And Substack is the platform we chose, and we decided to do it as a conversation between an oldish person and a youngish person. And we talk about the kinds of things that we would normally email back and forth about anyway. And we go pretty in depth because both of us are very contemplative. And what else would you add, Pa?
Yeah, we right away both thought it was a good idea. It came very naturally to us. I had been reading, the New York Times has a conversation between Bret Stephens, who's conservative, and Gail Collins, who's more liberal. But it's I think a little more superficial. It's shorter. But that gave me the idea of making a conversation in print. And we thought across the gender barrier, across the age gap, it would be particularly interesting. And it's been, I think I can speak for both of us, we just love doing it.
You've been doing it for a few months now. Has it changed the way you talk to each other?
I wouldn't say so. I think we've had deep conversations since I was a little kid, as I remember. And this is just an extension of that. And now we get to share those conversations with our audience, which is fun.
Yeah, I agree. We've had those conversations since she was about 2. She was a very early reader and very verbal as a little kid, and I like to talk. So we've had some tremendous conversations over the years. The thing I do notice is, as well as I know Zan, I find that I know you better through this. Like your thinking now as an adult is sometimes surprising to me in a good way. I feel like I get to know your thoughts at a little deeper level than when we have a conversation in person.
Huh.
It's a good thing.
As a father of daughters, I would look at, what you guys are doing, and I say, what a treat. I want some of that. When I get to spend time with my daughters, we have the deepish conversations because I've never wanted to have shallow conversations with anybody if I could avoid it. So it's really interesting to see what you're doing.
I was going to ask Zanny, like, do you feel like I'm thinking about, to me, how unique this is that you're oldish dad and you can have this kind of relationship. And now that it's moved into this deeper level in a way or another level. And I wondered what it's like for you, like when do your friends and your peers ever say like, wow, your dad is so unusual, or do you have that sense? Or because I'm thinking about oldishness, which obviously is the theme of our podcast, and just thinking about that as we age, we have this choice to continue to be creative and connect and think and process and have opinions and start new projects or not. And so I just was looking at you and thinking, what is that like for you having a dad who is oldish in all the best ways?
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that my dad is older than most of my friends' dads just because he was 45 when I was born. So our age gap is that much greater. And so for my friends, it really is surprising that I can have such a deep relationship with my father and have these kinds of conversations, especially because he's that much older than I am. So that just adds another dimension to that, which is wonderful. We come from very different times, very different generations, and we kind of meet in the middle and each contribute something to these conversations.
It's refreshing to me. Any kind of youthful communication is refreshing to me. And I think it's important. In older times, it was much more common for people of different generations to be together a lot. I grew up with my grandparents in the same house. These days, I think there's more of a separation, and oldish people and old people tend to hang around with other old people and maybe not see as much of the younger generations. And I really find it refreshing anytime I'm around younger people. Challenging sometimes, I can feel a little out of date with some of the things I believe and some of the ways I say them. But Stan and I think, deal with that respectfully. And it's partly an education or an enlightenment for me to be exposed to new ways of thinking.
Exactly. Yeah. And some of your topics like technology and the difference between when we were younger, and I'm exactly the same age as you, Roland, as far as being born in 1953. So we have that kind of common. And Greg, you aren't that much different in age as far as how we grew up, but all of it, the work-life balance and burnout and all the things that you're talking about. And I find I'm a therapist professionally, and I find that by having younger people that I work with and meet with, that it helps me to recognize that it's not usually right or wrong. It's just I experience things a certain way, and now life is passed on and to the younger generations, and this is what it looks like in the younger generations, and it's not bad. And when I work with adults and parents, and they just talk about how horrible technology is and what it's doing to their kids, and it's like, it's different. It's very different with pros and cons. And so I can imagine and understand that interaction between the two of you and everyone else that you talk with can provide some of that.
It's also beyond technology too. I think one thing I've come to understand, correct me if you don't think this is right, Sam, but this younger generation feels certain things much more powerfully. Climate change and the threat of that is the best example. I think they're more engaged with the world than my generation was, even though our generation was politically active. There's so much more information available now. And that's been interesting to me to feel that through you, Sam.
Yeah, I think part of that is knowing that I have hopefully many decades ahead of me, and that these issues, AI, climate change, are going to be a major part of my life. And when I have children, a major part of their life. And for you, you've already seen so much happen, and you're not looking quite that far into the future, I would imagine.
Not even close that far in the future, yeah.
Yeah, there isn't that far in the future.
Not
most
exactly.
likely. But there was one thing that the generations have in common now is that there is an external existential threat. And when the three of us were growing up, there was the Soviet Union, and we grew up, we went to school, and there were air raids, and for some reason we hid our heads under the desk, which wasn't doing any good, but it was imminent, never happened, but it was always like, it's going to happen right now. And we kind of grew up with this dread of, it's going to happen right now. Turns out when I grew up, I met some people who had grown up in the Soviet Union, and we became very close friends. And they said, yeah, that's what they told us too. The Americans were horrible. They're going to blow us up. And what we were told was the Russians are horrible. And they're going to blow us up. And we became friends with them. And it's like, yeah, we're not blowing anybody up. But that was the threat then, though, was completely out of our control. And it could happen any second now. Somebody could do something stupid and we'd all be blown up. The climate change is no less an existential threat, I don't think, but it's a little bit slower. It's faster than people are willing to do anything about it, but there is a doing thing about it that's possible. We hope. Maybe AI will fix it. Who knows? But there's an existential threat, but the time frame is different a little bit. So that may make a difference in attitudes, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely.
I haven't talked to you too much, Sam, about that. What Greg just said is we had these drills. In my school, it wasn't under the desk. We went down to the basement as if there were a nuclear holocaust, that was going to make any difference at all. But it was a little bit, I don't want to say terrifying, but it was unsettling for a little kid to think, okay, let's go down to the basement and have this drill where in case a missile comes across the ocean and detonates the nuclear war. I mean, it was unnerving. Climate change, I feel like we have more in our power. We feel like we can do at least small things. With the Soviet situation, there was really nothing we could do.
Well, we had active shooter drills, which is something you never had to
Yes.
deal with.
Oh,
So,
yeah. Well,
Yes.
Yeah.
We never had
Yeah, I
that.
thought about that when those first became part of the typical school experience. And I thought this is your version of us having to crouch under the desk, but ours, it never happened. It was just this fear. Whereas obviously school shootings are happening all the time. And so what was it like for you having practice drills for active shooters?
I mean, it felt surreal. I remember just one in high school where we tested some kind of text warning system and, where I went to boarding school. So there were different buildings on campus and we had to figure out which building to go to and how to lock the doors. And it did feel, this was already 10 years ago, but it did feel somewhat far away. I couldn't imagine that happening, but I think it's more real for kids these days in the years since so much more has happened. Yeah. Different situations, but I'm sure similar fears to what you felt. And that's kind of a theme, I think, where the situations change, the news, everything that's happening in the world changes, but the emotions are still very much the same.
Absolutely true. I think that's one thing we tap into a lot of times in high Zan, high pod discussions is that the details, as you just said, the superficial details are different, but there's some real common ground, I know, between me and you, and I think between generations in general. Human life is human life. We all have fear, love. We all worry. We all want to be loved. Those basic instincts and emotions don't really change over the generations. They're more superficial manifestations of them that change. And I think we hit that note a lot, Zan and I, back and forth.
But I wonder why we lose sight of that, because I do feel like there's some animosity between people of my generation and people of your generation. And I wonder why that is. I don't know why we lose sight of that. Maybe because not everyone has a parent who's that much older.
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating to think about. What is that causes that rift when you think about older people, that we were young ones. So we should even be more attuned and in line with your age group and that younger. But I'm going to think about that question.
I published an op-ed in the Boston Globe last Christmas about this exact thing, and that some of my friends say, oh, the kids these days don't work. They just are on their phones all the time. They don't know what it's like and blah, blah, blah. And I said, no, I mean, I remember very well my parents saying we were going to be ruined because we watched the TV all the time. You know, we watched hours of TV a day or in a week, and the idiot box was going to ruin our minds. It's exactly the same thing. And we turned out, you know, our generation is not perfect, but we turned out mostly okay. And I'm sure younger generations who use their phone a lot will turn out perfectly okay also.
It makes me think about things like, I wonder in response to that question, whether it reflects things like that for older people, that aging is scary and change is scary. And what we know is what we know. And unless we have these experiences where we're talking to and involved with younger generations, that we can get caught up in, this is the way it was supposed to be. This is the way it was for us. This is the way it should be. What's wrong with you that you're not doing that? I'm wondering if as we age, we kind of start to lose sight of that. Like, you know, things are always going to change and be the same. And that is being open to what that means and what are the underlying pieces of who we are as humans. And I also just wanted to say, Roland, that as far as your book, which we enjoyed so much reading and talking about, I feel like your play with the Pope and the Dalai Lama and all their fantasy and the experience of stepping outside of their roles was a expression of that kind of curiosity for how can we look at things differently and how can we try to figure out who we are in our essences and step out of our roles and our masks and all of those things. And somehow I feel like that relates to what we're talking about.
I think it's humility. And I think the Pope and Dalai Lama in that book, at least, and probably in reality, were humble enough to do that and step out of their roles and don't have their ideas get set in concrete. And it's so easy for older people to think what you just said, Janet, this is the right way to do it. If you're a little bit humble, you can at least try to say, yeah, this is the way we did it. Some of it was good, some of it wasn't. Maybe there's a different way to do it, and not think just because we're older, we're wiser. I don't think we are wiser sometimes. We have more perspective, definitely. We've lived through things that the younger generation has not lived through, but does that make us wiser? I would say no.
And not in and of itself. I want to, before we drift away from something that you said, Roland, I just want to throw in a plug for the younger generation. I have grandchildren, and I hear their parents saying to them a lot, get off your phone. But I sit and watch them a little bit, and I don't know how common this is, but one of the things that my grandchildren are doing on their phones is they're playing video games. And they learn how to play the video games by playing them. So they're teaching themselves how to play a game. A lot of what sounds like noisy junk is every single game that's out there has a coterie of YouTubers teaching you how to play the game. So these kids are watching YouTube videos constantly about how to play that game. They're demonstrating active learning and creativity. All of my grandchildren who play the games have an interest in learning how to program, and they all make videos, and they want to make YouTube videos, and so they learn how to do that. When I was a kid, we played active fantasy games a lot. We'd go out in the neighborhood and we'd play cowboys and Indians and soldiers, and it was not long after World War II, so we played Germans and good guys, and those last statements are probably not even close to politically correct, but that's what we did when we were kids. And we played creatively constantly with the kids in the neighborhood. One of the things that's different that I see is that there aren't kids in the neighborhood, but my grandchildren all play remotely with other people. So they're learning together, they're playing together. They're not getting a heck of a lot of exercise except their thumbs, but they're not just wasting time looking at a phone the way that adults do. So that's a plug for the kids, and I think a comment on our educational system that these kids are all eager to learn. I had a conversation with one of my grandkids last week, and we were talking about this exact thing. And I said that it's impossible it's not impossible, but it's really hard to get kids to stop learning. So our schools have done a very good job at coming up with ways to stop kids from learning. They're actually really good at it. That's my high horse for the day. I just wanted to put in a plug for kids because they're not, being on phones is not what we think it is, I hope.
I wanted to ask you, Roland, about your journey to oldishness and what that's been like for you. Here you are, oldish, and starting something new with your daughter. And I don't know what other activities and projects are in your life, but what has it been like for you so far in moving towards oldishness?
It's not frightening to me in any way, shape, or form. I think by having children late, there's advantages and disadvantages for both generations. Definitely keeps Amanda and me younger. Having had children later, I think it definitely, if we had you, Zan, 20 years earlier, which we could have, or I guess we were married 18 years when you were born, so 15 years earlier, then you would have been out of our lives when we were middle-aged. And I wonder sometimes what the trajectory of the rest of our lives would have been like had that been the case. I think for some people, grandchildren perform that service, if that's the right way to say it, that they help keep you young. And I really think that's true for Amanda and true for me. We were married 18 years without having children, and then Amanda gave birth when she was 41 and 45, I think, Zan, and I was 44 and 48. So a little bit of an unusual trajectory. And I feel it definitely, I used to do carpentry for a living, and I still like to do it for fun. And during COVID, I built a little mini house in the yard, and I realized I could go 3 hours, 4 hours, maybe, and then I'd be out of energy. And I remember very well working 13-hour days, and that's just gone. And it's okay. I'm at peace with that. That's just the way life is, the way nature is, and a little bit of more time thinking about medical stuff. Definitely friends dying or becoming very ill is much more part of my life than it was even 10 years ago, but it's not bothersome to me. I just have a perspective on it. It is the way life works, and it's okay.
You think that I don't know what your spiritual path is, but from reading the book, it sounds like you definitely have one. And I wonder if that helps you as you face this chapter of moving
Absolutely.
towards
I mean,
our mortality.
I've had a meditation practice for 45 years, and I have had a passion for reading across the spiritual spectrum all those years. And also, I think one thing Zan and I share, I think it's okay to talk about, we both have a lot of physical problems, somewhat different, but both of us have been troubled by our bodies. And that gives you a perspective that, to me, connects to the spiritual path, which is really you are not your body. And the more you identify with your body, the more difficult it is to suffer and the more difficult it is to grow old. And I imagine the more difficult it will be to die. So this, I am identified with my body, but I think there's a way in which illness and pain and suffering and the spiritual path can make you disidentify a little bit with the body. Does that make sense to you, Zan, at all?
Absolutely. I completely agree. I feel I welcome relief from my body, and I think it would be easier to part with my body because of all it's put me through. So that makes sense to me.
Do you want to say what in specifically?
I have cystic fibrosis, which is a genetic disease, affects the respiratory systems above all else, but also all the other organs in the body. And yeah, I've been through many ups and downs and other issues as well. And that's, I think, part of our relationship, Pa, is that we both have these issues, even though we're separated by so many decades. And this is a place where we can connect.
Yeah, I agree with that. I broke my upper back when I was 23, and had lower back surgery when I was in my 30s. I have psoriatic arthritis. So it's been decades and decades of pain and discomfort, and not the same as cystic fibrosis. And he said, how many sinus surgeries have you had? 10 at least.
10, yeah.
And those are very painful. And so I think I'm not recommending that to anybody, but it definitely it's common ground for us. And it has the silver lining, which is, as I said, a little bit less of a complete identification with the physical body. I remember you saying to me when you had POTS, which was a terrible affliction, and I was beside myself with worry for you. And you said, Dad, I'm not afraid to die. And you were like, what, 14 or something? I mean, it was an amazing moment for me.
Yeah, that's a gift in many ways. Not that specifically, but I'm sure that's something I said back then.
Yeah. I'll never forget it. I almost started to cry. I mean, obviously you don't want to hear your child say that, but at the same time, I had a great admiration for you for feeling that way. You really did not feel like you were afraid. And that's an incredible thing to hear from a 14-year-old or anybody. And
I'm sure that will prepare me well for becoming oldish myself, because I think that fear of death I would imagine, is something that you feel as you age. And so to not have that weight on my shoulders, I hope that's helpful.
I've come close to death a few times, and I hope I don't regret saying this, but I was not afraid. It caught my attention, absolutely, but I wasn't terrified. I don't know. And I'm not saying that I never will be. There's different ways to die. There's different things that can terrify one. But I remember the occasions when I felt like I might die, and terror was not something that I felt.
Well, this might be a good moment to ask each of you what inspires you, as we're thinking about where we are in our journeys in life. And so what inspires you?
I would say for me, human connection inspires me. That moment when I can look in someone else's eyes and feel like there's common ground despite maybe enormous differences. So that could be an age gap, that could be cultural differences, even a language barrier. And that's what I seek. I do travel writing, and I have traveled around the world. And my favorite moment are when I'm talking to my taxi driver in Berlin and hear his life story and feel like we're both human beings. And despite coming from different backgrounds, there's a bit of soul that is recognizing the other person's bit of soul in that moment. And that is such a source of inspiration for me.
Yes. Makes me think of the quote, "The light in me recognizes the light in you."
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Beautiful.
That's what namaste means.
Mhm.
That's what namaste means.
Exactly.
It's beautiful.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Right.
What about you, Pa?
Definitely that. I think we have that in common, and we like to talk about those moments with each other. That I just had this little moment with somebody in the grocery store, or the garage where I had my inspection sticker done. We both really moved by that. For me, also beauty, I think in the widest definition, the beauty of music, the beauty of nature, a beautiful gesture by a human being, beautiful writing, beautiful prose. I feel like it's a little signal from the beyond, and it's trying to wake us up to something beyond the everyday worrying about my health, or worrying about money, or worrying about career. And this is every once in a while, this little ding from the universe, and that I find really inspiring and moving.
I think we should hang out more. There's a lot of commonality in the room here, so to speak. When I was reading your Substack this morning about the AI and the human touch, my trajectory took me across asynchronous communication. And this is a version of asynchronous communication. We're not in the same place at the same time. One of the things that I guess kind of haunted me growing up was that community was hard for me to find. There wasn't community in my home family. There wasn't, for me, they all got along fine, but didn't feel like community there. But when I got older and in the 1980s, when the online communication was just beginning, I discovered non-local community. And as I think you folks have also, your community is not restricted to the people that you can see when you go to the grocery store or when you walk down to the commons to graze the sheep, or the way that it's been for hundreds of years. I had an email correspondence with somebody in New Zealand soon after I got on the internet back in the mid-'80s, and we had something in common. So there was a possibility of getting that human connection with people that you weren't in the same room with. And that really had never happened before. I do go on YouTube more often than I should. And I went back when I was reading The Delight of Being Ordinary. The Dalai Lama's voice sounded familiar to me. So I went back and listened to some YouTubes of the Dalai Lama talking. And you did a great job getting the accent on paper, which is not easy to do. And the way he speaks, and he's got a little twitch of when he doesn't know how to say something, he'll turn to his translator up, and whoever it happens to be, and he'll say jise, which I thought for years was a Tibetan word, but it turns out that he was saying, how'd you say? So that little human touch there. And because of who Janet and I are and what we talk about a lot, I have to throw in that a great place for the human touch is on the pickleball court, where there's constant interactions and opportunities to be kind, and nothing particularly deep. I've been playing in the same place for 3 years. I don't know anybody's last name, but there's always opportunities to say, nice shot, or you did that well, or isn't that funny that you missed that, or that I missed that shot. But anyways, there's the little common touches that come up. And I think the case could be made that that's where nirvana is the common touches, because we're one thing you said in the substack, I think, Zanny, was you that said it, about it's one huge entity that we're all part of, and it's the touches of each other that help us to feel connected to that part. It's that feeling of connected is a really important thing, I think. So yeah, happy to hear that it's inspiring to you both. And that's where the beauty is, too. If you listen to a piece of music, if it touches you, if you feel the commonality with the people who are making that music, that's the music you like today.
I remember exactly the line that you're referring to that Zan wrote in the most recent Substack. And it was one of those moments that's like, I know how Zan thinks. I mean, I've known you your entire life, but every once in a while you come up with something like that just, it's like a tap in the head. It's really beautiful. That particular line was particularly beautiful. And I think it's part of what we were talking about before, that we're trying to transcend our individual identity, which is connected to our body. And there's some natural urge to do that. You see people at a music concert and they're all thrilled by the same song and they're jumping and waving their arms and dancing. What's that all about? That's some kind of connection that transcends their individuality.
Yeah, and the flip side of that is when we don't feel that, that's where a lot of human pain and suffering comes from, especially emotional suffering comes from that, feeling far away, feeling isolated, feeling like you're not on the same page as someone. That's what arguments are. I think it goes both ways.
See, that was another moment when you said that's what arguments are. That's just another one of those little sparkles of brilliance that come out of you that I really love. So that was great.
Sounds like such a special connection for the two of you.
Yeah, love of language is an important thing. The spoken language is how we get a lot of that contact with people, because you're not allowed to go up to strangers on the street and touch them, but you can talk to them.
In Italy, you are allowed to touch them.
Oh, yeah. What do you mean when you say that? As someone who haven't been there yet.
Zen studied there for 6 months, right, Zen, in high school. And I've been there a lot. We just came back from spending a big chunk of the winter there. One of the things that both Amanda and I really noticed, Amanda's Zanny's mom and my wife, is how often people touch each other. Amanda took a picture of a man in the restaurant, the owner of a restaurant that we'd gone to 4 times. I was sitting in the restaurant. We had had some conversations. He came up behind me and wrapped both arms around my neck from behind and hugged me. And I thought, in America, he'd go to jail. He'd be in court the next day. But it was so natural and beautiful. And it definitely part of that culture. And both of us really love that part of that culture.
Yeah, when I went to high school in Italy, I would have the principal of the high school would come up and grab my coat and zip it all the way up so I wouldn't get cold. Just beautiful moments like that.
Wow.
Yeah, those are nice touches. I went to Nepal a few years ago and went up to Everest Base Camp with a group of people as a fundraiser to see if we could get some attention and some money to find a cure for a disease or a condition that one of my grandchildren has. The guide was the young Nepali man. He's in his early 30s and a lifelong Tibetan Buddhist. And Nepal is one of the places where you can get to fairly easily, where the Buddhist temples are actual Buddhist temples that have been there for a really long time. He and I got to be pretty close walking around up in the mountains. And when we got back down, there was a picture. I was sitting in the restaurant having a well-earned beer, I think. And he just came up behind me and put his arms around me from behind and rested his cheek on my face. And I was like, you better not do that in a bar in the States with someone. But I think that may be why there are so many crazy people in the States, because nobody ever gets touched.
Yeah. And AI is not about touch and never will be about touch.
And unfortunately, they're going to put AI into human-looking robots, and it'll be not human touch, but it'll be touch. And one of the creepiest things that's coming, but it's coming.
I want to say one thing about Oldish, about your podcast, that I really like. You don't deal in the surfaces. You really take your time and get into subjects. And Zan and I try to do the same thing. And hi, Zan. Hi, Pa. We often will start out with something relatively superficial. And by the time we're done, I feel like we've gone into these corners and alleyways of thought that are really deep in the conversation. And I want to say that I like that about what you guys do.
Oh, thank you.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you.
We like it too. And I wouldn't do it otherwise. I wouldn't have a podcast if it weren't for that. And I always learn something that I didn't anticipate from Janet, or sometimes I say things that myself I didn't know I was thinking, and always our guests. So that leads me to a question for you, Zanny. Your dad has a meditation practice, do you?
Yes, more so sometimes than other times, but I do my best. I've had periods of several months where I'll meditate every day, and then other times where I fit in 1 10-minute meditation a week. But I started meditating when I was a little kid. I remember my dad would lead me through a meditation when I couldn't sleep or in a stressful moment. And, because I grew up with that, it's become a lot easier to integrate into my schedule as an adult.
When I'm thinking about how important, helpful, essential that kind of practice is when you are dealing with kind of physical struggles that you've had. As you were talking a little bit earlier, I was thinking about the whole idea of be here now, of being in the moment. And what you were saying, Zanny, about if it was time to die, you would be ready. And that being able to slough off this body will be a gift in some ways. And I think that being able to practice in meditation and thought and about being in the moment, I think then really helps as we age and become oldish, if we have the gift of living that long, that then we really are in a place which would be helpful our whole lives, but especially as we get older, it's like to be in the moment is what we have. And so to be here and now in this moment. So starting to practice that when you're a child and bringing that into your adult life, and then as an adult for many years, and is, I think, such a gift that we can give ourselves.
Beautifully said. And I think all we have in this life is the present moment, and those moments pass and then another one comes. And I think that's why aging doesn't necessarily, and you all can tell me if I'm wrong here, doesn't necessarily feel like a straight path forward, but it's just the present moment from a different perspective. And one thing that I've loved listening to a few episodes of your podcast is that you're still seeking. And from my point of view, it seems to me like people your age would have all the answers, and maybe that's not the case.
Speaking for myself, definitely not the case.
Yeah, definitely not the case. And I think we grow up that way for some reason, that we look at the adults in our lives as being perfect, all knowing. And then we get older. It's like, oh, it must be later on that happens. And it's like, it never really happens because that's not what life is about. But we do have that. And I just want to say that I appreciate your approach to your hi Zan, hi Pa, because it's so similar as far as having a conversation, because I think conversations are how we do get to deeper things, because one thing, it might be a little superficial when it starts, but that gets us thinking about this and this and this, and pretty soon we're there. So I want to ask each of you, what are you excited about in your life as you look ahead in the coming days, weeks, and what is scary about this journey for each of you at this time?
You go first, Zan.
What I'm looking forward to, I think continuing this project with my dad for sure. I think we really complement each other well, and it's exciting to think where we might take this next. We've started venturing into audio a little bit, so working on some conversations in person while we're both in the same time zone. I'm looking forward to that and spending time with family. And what's scary to me is the phase of life I'm in. I'm in my mid to late 20s and trying to figure out how and if and where to settle down, and being responsible, but balancing that with also enjoying life. It's tricky. Not an easy time of life.
Yes. Tricky's a good word to describe that. Yeah.
And you, Dad?
Yeah, for me, what's exciting is I do feel like I don't wish to be younger, despite I was physically more able then. I could run, which I enjoyed. I can't run now, for one example. But mentally, I would never go back to where I was when I was 15, 25, 35, 45. I would never go back. My inferior world is a calmer place. It's clearer and calmer. And I wonder if that will continue. I hope it does. I hope that trajectory continues. And as I age, I hope that I go to deeper places. I'm not sure. Maybe if you have more and more health issues, that becomes more difficult. I think that's definitely possible. But that the idea of that excites me. The only thing that frightens me really is I don't want to be a burden to other people. I don't care how. I don't want to suffer. Obviously, I expect to some degree or another. I would feel worse if my suffering were coupled with a burden on the people I love to care for me. That's probably the thing I fear or worry about more than anything.
Yeah, I get that. It's something I heard from my parents a lot, is that they didn't want to be a burden on anyone, and my grandmother would say that. I had the opportunity, and I use that word on purpose, I had the opportunity to be with my sister a couple of years ago as she was dying. I went and took care of her and her husband for a couple of months while they died within a couple of weeks of each other. I wasn't particularly close with my sister until then, and my brother-in-law, I found out, didn't actually like me until we went to the process. But I found it, and I said this to them more than once, a privilege and a blessing to be able to take care of them when they needed that, when they were making that transition. And so I'm thinking, I have no plans to say to my children, what a blessing it'll be to take care of me when I can't take care of myself anymore. But looking at it slightly from the other side, it was an opportunity. It was a way to make a connection that hadn't really been made thoroughly before in a couple of cases, in a way to make amends in a lot of ways, in a way to discover a different angle on love. And love is pretty much, you guys have been sitting in meditation and the way that you're talking, and I know Janet knows this, love is pretty much all there is. And to taste all of the kinds of love that are there is probably an opportunity for everybody.
That's helpful to me.
To me too.
Yeah, I think about it too, because I feel exactly the same way that I have 3 children and 2 grandchildren, and I don't want to be a burden on them. But then I think about, why is it that life is like this? Why is it set up in this way that as we get older, often that the younger people in our family are taking care of us? What is that opportunity or not? So I don't know, but maybe there is something there.
Definitely some Buddhist groups or schools that I know of, a big part of the practice is to be with people who are dying. And I salute you for doing that, Greg. And I've had that experience a little bit too. And it's an important part of life. It's like witnessing a birth, and witnessing the end of someone's life is I don't love the word educational, but in a spiritual sense, maybe instructive.
Yeah, I was just reading about death doulas. I don't know if you've heard of that. So they're
Just heard of that,
those birth doulas. Yeah. And I was like, boy, I want that. I want a death doula if that's how my death is, if it's not sudden or quick or something. Because it makes sense. If you think about dying as moving into a new realm, a new life, a new experience, then just like coming into the world, we're going as a baby, we're going out of the world into something else.
One last thing I want to say about Zan Hyde, we each do a drawing with each, we call them newsletters, substack. We do it twice a month. And neither of us is particularly skilled at it, I would venture to say, Zan. But it's kind of goofy and fun.
That's
and
putting
we
it
have
kindly.
And we have that aspect to our personalities. I think I know I'm very goofy sometimes, and we can get on laughing jags together about the simplest thing. And so even though we talk about some fairly serious things, we do add that drawing in there. It's kind of a way of lightening it up a tiny bit.
Yeah, it's good. I appreciate those drawings. And they're not labeled, as far as I could find, they're not labeled by which one of you did them. I have a little game going. It's like, well, who did this one? I haven't quite figured it out yet. But the goofy thing comes from growing up in Revere. And it's, if you weren't goofy, you didn't live
I don't
through
know what it comes from. Yeah, maybe so. If I have a couple of drinks, it gets really bad, so I have to be careful.
Okay, well, we have that in common too. One thing I wanted to mention, we were talking about being present with people as they're dying. What got me through with my sister was something that has gotten me through almost everything in the last 15 years, is listening to Pema Chodron. And she did an audiobook, and I think the title is Welcoming the Unwelcome. She was in her 80s when she recorded it, and she talks about, from the point of view of a person who's getting up there, the aging and dying from the point of view of Tibetan Buddhism, and brings in the Tibetan Book of the Dead and what the bardo means in terms of not just the place where, when I first read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, I don't know, probably 50 years ago, it was like, this is where you go after you die. But her take on it is every moment is a bardo. Every moment is a place where decisions get made about what you're going to do next, and where you sum up where you've been, and where, everything changes right at that moment in the bardo of this life. And it really helped to get me through what was going on with my sister and my brother-in-law, and what was going on in my own life, and all of those things coming together. So I highly recommend listening to that when and if you get a minute or you're so inclined. Because I don't know where I'd be with it. It's Welcoming the Unwelcome.
Great title.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's a really good attitude toward life. And I don't know whether you know Pema, but she's just wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
She's phenomenal. She's an angel.
Yeah.
The Zen expression is say yes to everything.
Yeah.
Same thing. very difficult to do, but an amazing attitude if you can do it.
Well, okay, we should probably wrap up. And I want to thank both of you enormously for coming on and hanging out with us for a while. This has been it's been a lot of fun, and I'm enjoying getting to know you a little bit. And I love seeing the daughter-father connection like this. And I'm very close with all three of my daughters, and I just love to see it. And you guys not only do it, but you talk about it, which I think is extra fun. So thank you for your Substack and for all the different writings that you've done that have made my day more than once. And hope you come back.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it was really good to meet you both. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Let's do
Yeah,
it
thanks
again
for having us.
sometime.
Absolutely. It was wonderful.
Good. Well, that's music to my ears. So happy Father's Day, Pa. And
Thank you.
and happy Father's Day, Zanny. It's your day too. If there wasn't a Zanny, there wouldn't be a Pa. So
Exactly. Good. Well said.
That's true.
He made me a pie.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, I think your experience was the same as mine. That's where I learned what love meant, was when my kids showed up. I had no idea.
And sure. An entirely different dimension. Yeah, it's so much deeper. It's amazing.
That's it for now. Thanks for listening. We had a great time and hope you did too. Hi Zan, Hi Pa is at merullo.substack.com. It's always a stimulating read. You can find links to The Delight of Being Ordinary and other books by Roland Merullo in our show notes and on our website www.oldish.me. You can find a link to Zan's writing portfolio there too. You can leave a comment and suggest a book for us to read or a guest to have a conversation with on our website at www.oldish.me. Join us next week as co-hosts Dr. Janet Price and Gregg Kaloust and our dear friend Leslie Ross Degnan hold another meeting of the Oldish Book Club. For this episode, we read Ursula K. Le Guin's Tehanu, the final volume in her award-winning Earthsea series. If you haven't read Le Guin, you haven't read American literature. As always, please review and rate Oldish wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps others like you to find us. And please tell a friend.